should have been an easy score. Rob an old man, leave without much fuss. We never could have guessed how south it would go. Everyone had heard of Duncan Adams. He'd been a fixture in the community for generations, living in that wild old house up on Mount Yaller. He'd been a writer, a professor of antiquities at Georgia State College, and any number of other things. His house was supposed to contain all sorts of expensive things, and we were going to see if the rumors were true. Mike didn't like it, though. Guy like that is certain to have all sorts of security, the best measures money can buy, and you just expect the four of us to walk in like it's nothing. Julius, Gavin, Mike, and I like to call ourselves a crew, but that was just from watching too many heist movies. In reality, we were just four guys who like to break into people's houses and steal things. We weren't druggies, we weren't criminals, despite what our records said, but we did like to buy nice things, and stealing often paid for them better than a real job. You'd think so, I said, but my brother went up there to do a job and said that there were no security systems, no cameras, no nothing. The dude is just asking to get robbed, and I say we take him up on it. My youngest brother's a plumber, and that was actually where I got the idea for the job. He got called about a month ago to fix some pipes in the old man's bathroom, and came back to tell us how cool the place was. He had all these mirrors on the grounds, and in the house, and on the walls, and it was like a fun house. It was really cool looking, he said. The old man had paid him a mint to do the job, and I'd spent the next 3 weeks thinking about that house, and planning the biggest heist that I could imagine. The plan is that we go in just after dark and jump the sidewall. We can go in through the garden out back, and come out on the back porch and into the house. The old man's a hard sleeper. My brother said he had to ring the bell a dozen times before he woke up. We can go in and out before he even knows we're there, and live like fat rats off the spoils. Mike still wasn't sure, but greed was slowly eroding his sense of self-preservation. He said he would bring it to a vote with the rest of the crew, and later that afternoon he called to say that the vote had been carried unanimously. The other two were in, and Mike wasn't about to hold us up with some tickling feeling of doubt. Hope your intel's right, because if you're not, we're all going to be royally screwed. And that was how we came to be hunkered in the scrub around the Duncan Adams estate, waiting for it to get good and dark. We were all dressed in dark clothes, Jules and Gavin wearing ski masks, while Mike and I just had our hoods pulled up. I was pretty sure that we wouldn't need cover, but Jules had 2 prior arrests, and Gavin was clean for the moment. Both wanted to stay out of prison, if they could help it, and had opted to cover their faces. As the dark began to settle around us, we kept to the fence and prepared to vault over. It was just a simple concrete wall, no lights or cameras on the top, but Mike stopped before making a stirrup with his hands to point at a sign on the wall. You didn't say nothing about a dog. I looked at the sign, wrinkled my brow as I tried to remember if Lewis had mentioned a dog. He hadn't. He'd said nothing about any kind of animals on the property, but a dog could complicate things. The sign was the usual black and yellow one that bore the legend, "Beware of dog," on it, but it looked a little faded, and I suddenly wondered if it was something from a while ago. It's probably old. Lewis didn't say anything about a dog or a cat or anything to do with animals. Mike seemed unsure, but I doubled down. Tell you what, I'll go first and drop behind the gate. If there's a dog, it'll just tear me up, and I'll find some way to get out, or you guys can run. We'll only be out for the gas it took to get us here, and I'll have spent a night in jail, worst case scenario. Mike still looked unsure, but he made a stirrup with his hands, and I vaulted over the wall and landed in a well-kept backyard. It had been landscaped to look oriental, maybe Japanese or something, and there was a bridge over a little creek and a well-cared-for walkway that led to the back of the house. There was a sand pit with rocks in it, some trees cut to resemble bonsai trees, and several large reflective columns interspaced around. It was definitely different, but I liked it the longer I stood waiting to get mauled by a Rottweiler or a pit bull. "What do you see?" Mike whispered, as I scanned the area for a slobbering beast that was just waiting to strike. Nothing. Well, not nothing, but no dog. Come on over, I think it's safe. They dropped over one at a time, Mike reaching back to pull Gavin over before landing himself. They all stared at the strange little garden, so alien in the twilight, and when no lights came on to mark them, and no dog came out to chase us away, we all sighed collectively. Looks like there wasn't a dog after all, Julia said. Or he's inside, Mike said skeptically. Whatever, cross that bridge when we come to it. We gotta get inside first, I reminded them, as we set off across the little garden path. It was a little eerie to walk across the shadowy garden with only the moon to guide us. The place seemed to be made of strange angles, and the reflective monoliths didn't help matters much. They were everywhere, a new one jutting up every 7 or 8 feet, and they played strange games in the moonlight. I would catch myself looking at them out of the corner of my eye, and more than once I had to turn and make sure something wasn't following us. The reflections created strange shadows, and I was sure I saw something dart out of sight before turning to find nothing and nowhere that it could have gone. These things are weird, Julia said, keeping his voice pitched low. I could swear I keep seeing something in them, but it's gone when I look. Me too, Gavin said, sounding a little unnerved. Eyes on the prize, boys, I reminded them, but I didn't sound as sure as I tried to convey. The backyard hadn't looked very big, but as we moved towards the house, it seemed to go on forever. We were staying low, trying not to draw attention to ourselves, but it seemed like we should have been there by now. Whenever I looked at the back porch, it always seemed to be about 50 feet away, and every step seemed to bring us no closer. What the hell was that? Gavin asked, and his voice was too high. Julia shushed him, whispering back, What are you talking about? There it was again, right there, I saw it, Gavin said, pointing at one of the polished monoliths. I glanced at it, but it was just a flat reflection of the weird trees sitting on the back wall. There's nothing there, Gav. Get it together, man. In a few hours, we'll be leaving with more loot than we can carry. Then you can freak out if you still want to. Gavin looked unsure, but he nodded and kept pace as we made our way through the collection of old trees and topiaries. He wasn't the only one getting a little nervous, though. I could see something in those reflections, too. Something I was beginning to think might be our dog. It was big. Way too big to go vanishing like it always seemed to. It was a mastiff or a wolf hybrid or something, and the longer we trekked through the garden, the closer it seemed to get to us. At first it was just curiously observing us, seeing what we were doing and enjoying its little game of startling us. As we neared the house, though, the game changed. Now it was getting closer to our group, weaving between the statues and plants, getting bigger as it stalked us. I still wasn't sure how it was doing that. The thing had to be nearly 5 feet tall on all fours, but it would disappear any time I turned to look behind me. I wondered if there was some sort of electrical gadget in these things, maybe a display mount to scare intruders, but when I looked right at the polished mirror front, I saw nothing but my own reflection and the larger-than-usual bonsai topiary behind me. I'd like to tell you that we made it to the house before things went sideways, but that's not true. Truth was, we never even saw the inside of the house. We came within about 10 feet of the back porch, a trip that seemed to take longer than it should have, when the purpose of the monoliths became apparent. We were hunched around some of the oddities of the garden, trying to get our nerve up before heading in. Gavin and I weren't the only ones that had been seeing things out of the corner of our eyes, and nerves were high as the goal came into view. Now the real work would begin, but we weren't sure what to expect from this funhouse garden. Would we be allowed to make it to the house? Would we be mowed down by some huge hound on our way to the porch? I didn't know, but suddenly this didn't seem like the easy score I had promised them. Jules, I whispered, Go see if the back door's unlocked." "Why have I gotta do it?" Jules asked, his nerves jangling a little. "'Cause you're the closest to the door. Just get up there and see." Jules looked at the house like it was the absolute last place he wanted to go. But greed still had its teeth in him. We could still make something of this, still come out okay, and he scampered up the porch steps with all the stealth he could muster. The doors were glass, fronting on a huge glassed-in kitchen, and when Jules reached out for the handle, he seemed as shocked as we were when it pulled down easily. Damn, guy's not even... But as he took his eyes off the glass, I saw something loom up behind him, something that made me tremble. It was the dog, a huge black hellhound with a gaping maw full of sharp teeth and piercing red eyes. It was behind the glass, and I thought for sure that it would jump through and bury Jules with its bulk. I started to yell, started to warn him, but when it leaned out of the glass and snapped its teeth around him, I was surprised by the lack of a crash. Jules looked surprised too, his shock absolute, and when the creature yanked him into the glass and out of sight, we were left in stunned silence with only the crickets for company. "What the hell was that?" Gavin said, his voice trembling audibly. "I don't know," Mike said, his voice inches behind me as he inched away with every breath, "but I'm not sticking around to find out." He was off and running then, tearing back towards the wall we'd come over. He looked scared enough to jump it without any help, and when I called for him to stop, I winced as a light came on in the house. Great, we'd woken up the old man. Gavin saw the light and took a few steps back himself, but when Mike screamed suddenly, Gavin and I froze as we turned back to see what had happened. In the fleeting rays of the porch light, I saw Mike caught beneath the massive paws. It was coming from the surface of a polished square, and as the head emerged, the beast looked as big as a grizzly bear. The fur was wiry and stiff, something I believe they called brindled in the dog world, and its muzzle was already dripping with blood. It bent down over Mike, the poor guy screaming and thrashing as much as his smushed lungs would allow, and when it covered his head with its mouth, the crying and yelling was cut off abruptly. It took Mike's head with it, but was nice enough to leave the body behind as it disappeared into the polished surface of the brooding rectangle. Gavin and I just stood there for a minute, unsure of what to do. When the door to the back porch opened, we both got low as we tried to hide from whoever had come to check on the ruckus. "Who's there?" said a voice that had probably once been a little more impressive. Age had done it no favors, and now it was a little less impressive, a little less commanding, but the owner seemed to know that he wasn't the most dangerous creature in the garden. The sound of a cane thumping on the boards could be heard, and when he saw the body, he croaked out a rough laugh. "Decided to come and steal from an old man, huh? You didn't think you were the first, did ya?" I looked at Gavin as we hid, trying to tell him to be still, though he seemed to be losing that particular fight. "More than a few people have thought that they could come and plunder what I've rightfully taken in my prime. They see an old man living alone and think to make his home their find of the century. They never guess that the most dangerous thing here might be my own biggest find." As we watched, the old man put out a hand, and the hellish beast stuck its nose out of the window it had sucked Jules into, so the old man could scratch it like any other dog. "I was excavating a tomb in Russia when I found them. These strange black monoliths were just in a cave towards the back of the old tomb. I had never seen anything like them or the beast they held, but it had enough intelligence to understand me when I made it an offer. It didn't seem to be enough that he was going to kill us. The old codger meant to monologue before his hell beast devoured us. "Come back to my home," I said. "Come into the lighted world again, and I will take you from this place and let you hunt my enemies for me." And so I have. It has hunted a long time on would-be thieves and robbers, and eaten well in the process. You will be no different. Gavin looked at the back wall, a path that would take him over the unmoving corpse of Mike, and seemed to be trying to decide if it was worth the risk. I shook my head at him, trying to tell him not to, but when he suddenly sprinted across the lawn, I found myself right behind him. I could no more stop myself from fleeing in my terror than he could, and we dodged around the monoliths at every opportunity. The hound lunged at us nonetheless, coming out of either side as it tried to stop us. We were neck and neck, nearly to the wall, when Gavin suddenly tripped. I looked back and found that Gavin's foot was stuck in a trap too devilish to escape. The creature had him by the ankle, and as it dragged him backwards, I sprinted for the wall and leapt at the top. My fingers burned as they tried to dig into the concrete, and I'm not ashamed to say that I left a few fingernails behind as I scrambled over the top. I drove home, expecting that the creature or the police would come after me every mile of the way. When it didn't come lunging out of my rearview mirror and no blue and whites dogged my heels, I breathed a sigh of relief. I drove home, locked all the doors in my trailer, and went to my room so I could write this down while it's still fresh. Now that I have, I'm not sure what to do. Do I call the police? What would I even tell them? Can that thing get me through my own mirror? My computer monitor? The surface of my spoons? I don't know what to do, but I do know one thing. If you ever hear of Duncan Adams and his strange house in the mountains, and think that an old man living alone will be an easy score, think again. The dog that he has can't be bribed with treats and pets, and all you'll have from that place is death for you and anyone who comes along with you. Well, Miss Lee, this treatment is experimental, but we feel it will improve your condition. All you need to do is sign on the dotted line, and we can schedule you for the first of the week. The doctor tapped the form like a used car salesman trying to sell a sports car with no engine. The kind of salesman who thinks you're too stupid to look under the hood and too desperate to believe the deal is anything but genuine. That was the beginning of the end of my life. My name is Pandora Lee, and this is my story. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with a debilitating bone disease, the kind that causes your bones to be very weak. My doctor sent me to a specialist, and after running some tests and running up a small fortune in bills, he wanted to try an experimental treatment to harden my bones. I was hesitant. Who wouldn't be? But could I really afford to be in my condition? The following week, I arrived for my first treatment. The waiting room was the same bland area I'd seen 1,000 times. The sort of forgettable facade that hides the work that goes on beyond that unassuming blue door between the show floor and the butcher's shop. Children moved beads along a wire maze as parents and patients looked through magazines that had been current about 10 years ago. The smiling face of President Obama looked up from a table. He and Martha Stewart sharing space with Better Homes and Gardens and Highlights magazine. The magazines were only slightly more interesting than the paperwork on the clipboard I was muddling through, but I tried my best to ignore them. "Miss Lee, we're ready for you," a young blonde-haired woman in scrubs called to me, smiling brightly as she led me through the oddly dark blue door and into a hallway of the same color. Despite the buzzing overhead lights, the paint scheme made the whole place look shadowy, and I shuddered as she led me to a little room farther down. She showed me to a small, sterile room, with only a gurney and an IV stand to break up the emptiness. The room was blessedly brighter, a kind of eggshell white that verged on eye-watering, and I stepped inside and handed her the clipboard. "Please take a seat and get comfortable, Miss Lee. The doctor will be here very shortly." As I lay there waiting, the clean white paper crinkling under me. I had a gut feeling that this was a bad idea. I chalked it up to nerves, though. It was just another exam, just another series of tests, just another meeting that would end predictably. I should have listened to my gut. As the doctor walked in, he smiled his best crest kid smile, and I imagined I could see spit stains on his teeth. I wish I could tell you that he was an ugly little man, some goblin who scared me or made me wish a nurse had stayed to observe our interactions, but he was actually very plain-looking. Thinking back now, I can't tell you anything about him, other than his big grin and his neat little mustache. It might have been easier if he were a monster, but I guess life is rarely easy. Well, Miss Lee, as you know, this is still experimental. It's in the early trial phases. You'd honestly be one of our first human trials for the treatment, but we feel you are the perfect candidate. I stared at him blankly, unsure whether he expected me to be flattered or break out into applause. He looked uncomfortable, clearly not getting the response he was expecting. Calling the pretty blonde nurse from earlier, he asked her to strap me down and told me to relax. The straps were scratchy, the clasps sitting cold against my arm, and I found it hard not to squirm as she slid the IV in. The doctor reached into the hall and wheeled out a large metal canister. It looked like a fire extinguisher, the old kind with a hand crank, except for the face mask on the end, which is undoubtedly going over my face. He must have noticed my apprehension, because the too big grin made a return appearance. Don't worry, Miss Lee. It's all very safe. He placed the mask over my face, the smell of cleaner mixing with something sickly sweet and acidic. Breathe deep, he prompted, and I took my first breath, his voice sounding as if it were coming to me from the lip of a deep hole. You'll wake up in no time. Then it all went black, my last memory being the stuff I breathed in tasting like the smell of cleaner my mother had always used when I was young. Then I didn't think about anything for a while. I was floating for a while, my body as light as a feather, and I could have gladly floated in that void forever. When I dropped back into my body, however, it was worse than any falling dream I'd ever had. I opened my eyes and looked around frantically, my body still splayed across the gurney as the canister pumped whatever was in the tank into my lungs. I felt a surge of pain rip through my whole body, and I jerked fitfully against the restraints. The scream ripped up my lungs, the gas clouding my mouth as I choked on my anguish. The nurse ran in, trying to calm me to no avail. Calm down, Miss Lee. We don't want you to damage your bones while the treatment is doing its job. The pain is only temporary. The doctor will be in to give you something for it and explain everything. Her words did nothing for the pain that drilled into my bones, and after what seemed like hours, the doctor finally came in. He had a needle in his hand. The tip slid easily into the IV, and he filled the saline bag with something. It was cold, the liquid flowing in like ice, but the relief was immediate. I lay back gasping, the sudden lack of pain almost as jarring as the pain had been, and the big smile hovered over me like a specter. The first treatment is always the most painful, but it seems to be a success so far. You might have some joint stiffness for a few days, but that's to be expected, as the treatment hardens your bones. As the gas hissed and the ice brought sweet relief to my inflamed bones, I lay there drinking in grateful lungs of air. The lack of pain was hard to quantify, but I became aware over time that it wasn't just the sudden burning that had gone away. The everyday pain I had gotten used to, the inflamed joints and the deep ache of weakened bones, was also gone. It was like someone had flipped a switch in me, and suddenly I was exactly like I'd been before. This may seem like a small thing, but when you've lived with the pain, made it a day-to-day part of your life, its absence is like a physical loss. It was like a kid who's had his tooth pulled, his tongue prodding at the vacancy where something solid had been before. When he spoke, I had to shake myself back to reality to ask him to repeat himself. We will see you in 2 weeks for your next treatment. The nurse will give you a prescription when you leave. Take it twice a day in order to keep your body from rejecting the treatment. Understand? I nodded, still a little dazed, and agreed to take the pills. I made another appointment with the similarly pretty brunette and took the nondescript little bag she handed me. She smiled, saying they would see me in 2 weeks, and I headed home. As I drove home, I expected the pain to rear its head again with every press of a pedal or turn of the wheel. The pain had become like a swarm of gnats, ever present and buzzing. You never got used to it, but you became accustomed to it. It's never comfortable, but you look forward to the times when it isn't there. Now, it was just gone. I was driving with nary a pain or a wince, something I hadn't done in years. I should have been happy, but I kept waiting for it to disappear. Maybe that made me a pessimist, but I don't care. When you live like this long enough, you constantly wait for the other shoe to drop. I walked into my house, my bones still feeling like nothing so much as normal bones, and took the pills out of the bag. Reading over the label for side effects or warnings, I found nothing but the instructions on the outside. No name, no ingredients, no warnings, just 8 words in bold font. Take 1 pill, with food, twice a day. I opened the bottle and let a few of the pills roll onto my palm. They were white and blue gel capsules, the contents looking like nothing so much as the sugar on top of the snow caps my husband ate at the movies. As they sat in my hand, I noticed that they were oddly cold to the touch, and the feeling reminded me of the way the liquid had felt as it entered my IV. When they didn't immediately appear dangerous or try to bite me, I let them tumble back into the bottle and closed the lid. I set a reminder on my phone for 7 a.m. and started fixing dinner. When I went to bed that night, I had already forgotten about them, but as I pulled the blankets up around myself, I felt a sudden chill arrow through me. It should have raised a sort of red flag, but I was still riding the high of moving about my home without any of the pain from earlier that day. A few hours later, though, I was awoken by an icy chill going through my body, followed by an intense ache in my joints. As I tried to get up, I felt every bone in my body tighten. It was almost impossible to walk, but after a few minutes, it eased up, and I was able to make it to the bathroom. I figured this was just a side effect of the stiffness the doctor was talking about. And after a warm bath, some of the pain had abated. With some of my mobility returned, I shuffled back to bed, hoping to sleep off the pain until it was time for my first dose of medication. The next day, the pain of the night before was a fleeting memory, and I took my first pill and started getting ready for my day. It usually took me several hours to get my legs to cooperate enough to make breakfast, but today I moved about my kitchen the way I hadn't in years. My joints felt fluid, my bones were as forgettable as they should be, and when I woke my husband up for work at 10, he looked at me a little shocked to find breakfast already on the table, and the kitchen dishes cleaned and put away. "Wow, those treatments really did the trick," he said, taking my hands in his big calloused ones, intent on kissing them. He dropped them in surprise as a shudder ran through him. "Geez, babe, your hands are so cold." There was worry on his face, but I waved his worries away and told him it was nothing. "It's just a side effect of the treatment. I'm fine, sweetie." Deep down, though, I was worried. I should have called the doctor's office right then and there and told them about the side effects. After the weirdness that had happened the night before, I should have been more concerned, but it all comes back to one thing. Despite the stiffness, despite the cold hands, despite the next 2 weeks where sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night and hobbled into a warm bath, the intense pain in my bones was all but a distant memory. I would have given anything to be done with the pain like that, and it turned out the cost was more than I could have known. 2 weeks later, I arrived at my next appointment. I was curious to see if it hurt the same way it had the time before, but my reasons for going were twofold. I had taken the last of my pills that morning, and I knew that I would need more if I wanted to maintain this lack of joint pain. So I smiled at the nurse, let them strap me down again, let them slide the needle into my arm, and breathed in the gas like the good doctor told me to. The treatment was performed the same as the first, but I gritted my teeth through the pain as I waited for him to inject my IV with that sweet icy liquid as the gas did its work. As the strap slid off, I nodded through the closing instructions and shuffled up to the desk to make my appointment and get my pills. I moved as if in a dream, my body feeling strangely heavy as I climbed into my car and drove home. I jerked awake in my driveway, unsure how I had arrived home. I had never fallen asleep at the wheel, much less sleep drove home, and the thought made me shiver. I grabbed my prescription and headed inside, wanting to get as far from the vehicle as possible at that moment. I thought about starting dinner as I trudged in, but decided to take a nap instead. It was early still, only mid-afternoon, but I was suddenly exhausted. I could barely keep my eyes open, and as I slid into bed, wearing the same clothes I'd left the house in, I thought I was settling in for nothing but a couple hours of rest. 10 hours later, I shuddered awake into total darkness as an arctic chill shot through my nerve endings. It was worse than it had ever been, worse than any time before it, and as I tried to climb out of bed, my legs froze up and sent me spilling to the floor. I lay there, unable to bend my legs or arms, only able to pull them towards me like palsied claws. I was overjoyed when I heard my husband's soft snores from the bed beside me. He would help me. He would get me to the hospital. He could get me into a warm bath, and I opened my mouth to scream his name. My lips trembled as I prepared to cry out for him, but no sound escaped my chilly maw. I gasped weakly, his name lost amongst the short barks of sound, while he slept peacefully a few feet away. I lay there with tears of fear dripping down my face, certain that he would wake up the next morning to find me dead. I almost expected to see them freeze against my cheeks, but they did little more than pool beneath my head and wet the side of my face. I spent that night drifting in and out of my new, painful existence. It felt like I lay there for weeks, listening to the content snores of my spouse as my body was racked with freezing chills. I thought I would die again and again, and as the sun began to rise, I almost wished for it. The colder I became, the less the shivers seemed to blow through me. I still felt them, but my body had stopped responding. I was powerless to move, incapable of doing much besides watching the sunrise and the day begin. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because when my husband yelled my name, my eyes were startled open. What the hell is this? But he seemed to lose his words as he stood over me. I mouthed at him, asking him to help me, but he looked unsure. I don't know how. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but instead he turned to my vanity and fetched a small hand mirror. I looked back at myself, not sure it was me for a moment. I was looking at a perfect china doll as she lay curled up on the floor. Her skin was a perfect alabaster, broken only by the slight spider cracks that ran through it. As I watched, another chill coursed through me, and I saw the cracks lengthen as my fragile form tried to shiver. I wanted to cry, but I had no tears left. Instead, I told him to put the phone next to me and put it on text-to-speech. I wanted him to understand, wanted to explain how this had happened, while I could still explain anything. He did as I asked, saying he would go get help, but I don't think he'll be back in time. It took a surprisingly short time to lay it all out, but I can feel the change beginning to affect my face now. My blinks are becoming slower and slower, and my throat's beginning to tighten as it stiffens like my skin. My lips have started to flake as I speak, the cracks in my arms likely running through the lips my husband loved to kiss. I'll be nothing but a beautiful statue soon, a curiosity piece for people to speculate over. But with the time I have left, I want people to understand how I came to this point. I don't know if it was the treatment or the pills, maybe it was both, but it doesn't appear to be ready for human trials. If they ask you to sign your life away as I did, make sure you know what you're agreeing to. The short respite from pain wasn't worth the hell I found myself in now. It's getting hard to breathe now. My lungs are laboring to pull in breath, and I can feel the same shivering running through them with every gasping pull. My eyes are fixed forward, my fingers forever locked together, and I feel that every word may be my last. If you make it home, Jason, know that I love you, and I'm sorry that this is where we must part. I hadn't thought about it until last week, but it seems to have snowballed into something that's gotten out of control. I was looking through some photos while helping my mom move when I saw him for the first time in 15 years. Dad had passed away a few months ago, and Mom was just starting to clean out some of his things. The picture had been taken at a birthday party, my 9th birthday party, to be exact, and it showed my friends and I standing in front of the house and smiling as my mom took the picture. There were about 9 of us, all wearing party hats and ice cream mustaches under our noses, but the happy faces of my friends and I weren't what had caught my eye. It was the gaunt man standing in the window of the living room, the one looking out at us with the empty black eyes and the sinister little smile, the man who had haunted my childhood, though I'd never quite believed in him after the age of 12. Mr. Danver, a specter that my late father had brought to life. I remember the first time I had ever even heard of Mr. Danver, and the memory made my skin crawl. It wasn't scary because of what I had been told, but because of the unwilling way that my father had shared it. I had been 5, and we were getting ready to go to preschool. I hadn't slept well the night before, and I was cranky as I sat at the table and picked at my breakfast. I was wearing half my school clothes, 1 sock, 1 shoe, and I was so far from being ready that when my dad saw me, you could tell that he knew we were going to be late. "Come on, kiddo, we need to get moving. Finish your breakfast, get your clothes on, find your shoes, let's get on the road." I don't remember what I said to him, something snarky and grumpy, and when he turned back to me, he spoke before he had quite made up his mind to. "You better hurry and get ready before Mr. Danver comes to get you." The silence that hung after that statement was enough to make me turn my head and look at him, and that's why I saw when he slowly put a hand over his mouth. He was looking at me like he'd just sworn, and he was afraid that I would start repeating it. He seemed terrified of what might suddenly come out of my mouth. "Who's Mr. Danver?" I asked, and that seemed to seal the deal. Dad went rigid, not all at once, but slowly, like something petrifying. His eyes stared out at nothing, his mouth opening a little bit as he gasped slightly. His body seemed to be trying to fight whatever was going on and failing, his mind railing against the inevitable. He looked like a landed fish, something struggling to breathe, even as it struggles with the hook that has pulled it from the water of life. And when I asked the question a second time, the hook seemed to find its anchor, and he stopped fighting. "He comes for bad kids, naughty kids, kids who don't listen. He finds where they hide, and they go missing. When Mr. Danver comes to town, you better beware. When Mr. Danver comes to town, you better be scared. He's tall and old, with skin so thin. His hair is wisps, gray as tin. His teeth are sharp, his eyes are black. He'll drag you off, and you'll never come back. When Mr. Danver comes to town, you better beware. When Mr. Danver comes to town, you better be scared." He delivered it all in the well-trained cadence of an off-Broadway actor at an audition. It sounded like something he had repeated 1,000 times, and I realized then that it was something I'd never forget. The scariest part about it wasn't what he had said. It was how he had said it. The voice was so different from Dad's that it was like watching a ventriloquist talk through him. Suddenly, it felt like a stranger was in the house, and I shuddered as a cold chill ran through me. I didn't say anything in the face of that silence, but when I lifted a hand to my eyes, I realized I was crying. Large, silent tears were sliding down my face, and as my dad came out of his trance, he started crying too. He came to scoop me into his arms and pressed me to his chest as he repeated the same thing again and again and again into my corn silk hair. I'm sorry. God help me. I'm so sorry." When Mom came home to find us both watching Disney movies on the couch, she asked why he had called out of work and not taken me to school. When he explained the situation in soft tones as he pressed his mouth against her ear, she joined us on the couch and pulled me into her lap. That was the first night I saw the old specter, but it wouldn't be the last. I woke up with the most profound chill I'd ever felt. It ran up my cheeks like mice feet, and my eyes popped open as I lay in bed. The room was dark, my toys casting shadows across the floor as the moon crept in through the window. But I knew those spooky shapes were not the source of my discomfort. I could almost imagine that I heard the song Dad had sung as it scampered in with the air conditioner in the vents. I could see the dust motes in the moonbeams as they boogied to that haunted chorus, and as I stared at them, that's when I saw him. He was hunkered in the corner, his knees against his chest, his arms resting on his knees. He was looking at me from the pit of shadows where he sat, and when he realized I was looking back at him, I saw a wide grin stretch across his face. His toothy mouth stretched ear to ear, and as he stood up, I could hear his joints popping like kindling wood. His hair set neatly on his head, looking like the hair you saw on zombies in horror movies, and it brushed the ceiling as he stood up. He rose until his head nestled in the corner of that ceiling, his frame all of 8 feet tall. He had a hat in his hand, a hat I would later learn was called a bowler, and his arms were covered in a rich brown suit coat. He was wearing a suit beneath it, but I was only vaguely aware of it. As he rose, the moon casting his features in contrast, I was mesmerized by his eyes. They were dark pits of shadow that looked at me with mirthful knowledge. "Sorry to wake you," he said, his voice sounding like someone who's lost their breath to excitement. "I just wanted a peek. I'm sure I'll get a closer look sometime. Toodaloo." I started screaming then, and when Dad came in and turned the light on, there was nothing in the corner but the star stickers that stuck to the ceiling above the spot. Those stickers never glowed again, and I took them down when I noticed and threw them away. I was afraid he had gotten his taint on them. Dad pulled me into a hug, Mom beside him, hugging me in an instant, and both of them held me until the shaking stopped. After that, I saw him any time I did something disobedient. Sometimes I would see him lurking in the corners of my vision if I said something smart to my mom or dad. Sometimes I would feel those black eyes watching me if I didn't do my chores. There was a time when I heard him laughing after I'd gotten angry at my mom, and I was always quick to apologize and make things right. Mr. Danver made me conscious of my actions in a way that I'd never been before, and I was a better person because of it, I suppose. I never saw him when I was rude to my friends, but just the knowledge that he might be watching me made me forgive more often, and I was less likely to be cruel to others. Sometimes when I thought about cheating on a test or taking something from a store, I would imagine him just waiting to get me and think better of it. It all culminated when I was 12, on the day I ran away from home. I'd been looking forward to a sleepover at my friend's house that weekend, an event that was highly anticipated. Matt had one of these for his birthday every year, and a bunch of us would go to his house and eat junk food and watch movies and tell scary stories and just have the times of our lives. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks, and I knew that if Mom found the math test at the bottom of my bag, the one with the big red F on it, I could hang it up. I'd buried it deep in my backpack, but not deep enough apparently. She had found it before I could make my escape to the party, and we had gotten into a screaming match over it. It was unfair, I told her. I'd looked forward to this party for so long, and it wasn't fair that now I didn't get to go. She said that was too bad, and if parties were more important than schoolwork, then I needed to get my priorities in order. I was so mad, so furious with my mom, that I did the unthinkable before I could remember the specter of Mr. Danver. I told her I was going whether she gave me permission or not, and walked out the door before she could stop me. I ran up the street, heading for Matt's house, listening to my mom call from behind me. I expected her to be angry. I expected her to be upset. Instead, she just sounded scared. She told me to come back, that we could talk about this, but I was in no mood to listen. I was going to the party, whether she liked it or not, and nothing was going to stop me from getting there. It wasn't until I saw him standing under a burnt-out streetlight that I remembered the looming specter of Mr. Danver. When it began to flicker, I realized it had a little more juice in it. In the flickering light, I could see the tall, thin frame as he grinned at me, his translucent skin clinging to his face like a mask. He had his hat in his hand again, his immaculate suit still looking pristine in the flickering light, and his eyes reflected that flicker like a stuffed animal's. He looked unreal, standing in the everyday world, like a piece of Halloween decor that's a little too well made. He was utterly still, his head brushing the bottom of the lamp, but his fingers gave away his excitement. They drummed on the brim of his hat and made him look like a dog preparing to yank his lead and give chase. We stood looking at each other for a count of 5 before I turned and shot off towards home. Mr. Danver was coming after me just as quick, but his lack of footfalls made me panic all the more. I turned to look and saw the too tall thing eating up the ground. His long legs moved like a spider's, and he ran like a cartoon character in big, exaggerated galumphs. He was gaining on me with every step, his strides twice my own, and I screamed in frustration and terror as I put on an extra burst of speed. To think that a moment of frustration was going to seal my fate forever. I'd been hyperfixated on my behavior for so long, and now a sudden lapse in judgment was going to kill me. "When Mr. Danver comes to town, you better beware." The wind seemed to bring the hateful words to my mind as it rushed past my ears. "When Mr. Danver comes to town, you better be scared." I was scared. I was terrified. When my house came into view, I was afraid that I would get snatched within view of the front door. Mr. Danver would reach out with one long arm and pull me into the darkness, and I'd be gone forever. It would happen just that quick, and no one would know what had gotten me. Correction, my parents would know. They would know, but how would they tell anyone? To admit to such would make them sound nuts and probably make people think that they were responsible for my disappearance. I turned suddenly, going through the gate and running up the walk, and I felt the icy chill of Mr. Danver's hand as it passed inches from me. I took the steps 2 at a time, praying the door would be unlocked, and when Mom threw it open, I leapt into her arms. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Please don't let him take me." I pressed my face against her, not daring to look back into the yard. Mom whispered that she forgave me, but when she talked to Mr. Danver, her voice was a mixture of rage and an old fear. "Get out of here. All's forgiven. There's no misdeed. You cannot take him." I kept my face pressed against my mom, but I still heard Mr. Danver's spidery voice when he answered her. "Another time, then." When I peeked back, he was gone. Dad came home an hour later, getting off work early after Mom called him, but I was still shaking and sobbing on the couch. "Why?" I asked him when he came in. "Why did you tell me about Mr. Danver?" My dad was quiet for a moment, thinking about his answer, before sighing and saying, "'Cause it's not something I meant to do. It happens. Someday it'll happen to you too as well. Never. I would never do that to my child. I shuddered as he wrapped me in a hug, but I didn't pull away. Sweetie, you won't have a choice. I didn't have a choice. My father didn't have a choice. No one has a choice. Once you know about him, the knowledge demands to be shared. His name is dark knowledge, a secret shared by many, and it must be served. That was when he told me how he had come to know about Mr. Danver from his father. I was playing with something on the couch when Dad told me to clean my room. I ignored him, wanting to finish my game, and when he said if I didn't go do it now, he would call Mr. Danver, I looked up, and when he said it, the look on his face was both confused and afraid. Dad, your grandpa, wasn't always the nice guy that you know. He joined AA when I was in high school, but before that he was a drunk. He could be mean when he was drunk, too, and I should have known better than to hesitate when he asked me to do something. Instead, I asked who Mr. Danver was, and when he sang me the little song, it was the soberest I'd ever seen him up until that point. The words were forced out of him like vomit, and when he finished, he threw his arms around me and told me how sorry he was. Dad looked at me, and his eyes were hollow pits. I saw him in my room that night, and it wasn't the last time either. He told me that when he'd told the story to Mom, the one about his father telling him about Mr. Danver, she'd cried and said that she'd seen him too. Her dad told her too, one day you'll tell your kids. You won't want to, but you won't have a choice. The song is as inevitable as Mr. Danver. What you got there? I jumped as Mom came in and found me looking at the picture. I put it in my pocket, not wanting to remind her about Mr. Danver if I could help it. I moved to another box, Mom taking the box of photos I'd been looking through, and I tried to put the name out of my mind. It was easy to do as I worked, but as I sat at home later, still sore from a day of moving furniture and sorting boxes, I started thinking about it. If my parents and I knew about Mr. Danver, did anyone else? I pulled up Reddit and made the post before I could think better of it. I didn't know if you could transfer the knowledge like that, but I wanted to know bad enough to find out. Hey guys, I remembered something from when I was a kid. I just wanted to know if anyone else had heard of it. My dad told me a spooky story about Mr. Danver when I was a kid, saying he would come get me. My mom knew about it too, but I was wondering if it was something anyone else had heard of, or if it was something that he made up. The post had barely sat for 5 minutes before I got a response. It wasn't the last either. Yeah, my dad told me about him too when I was little. Seems like I must have had nightmares about it, 'cause I can remember dreaming he was in the corner of my room sometimes. OMG, so weird. That was exactly what my mom called it too. It was weird when she told me too. I thought she was having a seizure. My uncle used to tell me that he would come get me if I was bad. Wasn't there a song or a poem that went along with it too? Yeah, it was pretty catchy, but I can't remember all the words. On and on and on. The thread had about 100 comments, and not all of them were Americans either. Mr. Danver seemed to be something that lived in the consciousness of most English-speaking people, and even if it had a different name, the descriptions they gave were exactly the same. Tall, suited, pale, wispy hair, sharp teeth, black eyes. The description was universal, and the idea that I wasn't alone didn't make me feel any better. If you too have experienced Mr. Danver, then it's already too late. One day you'll tell your kids. One day they will have the knowledge. One day, if they're lucky enough to avoid the icy grip of Mr. Danver, they'll pass it on. The cycle always continues, whether you want it to or not. One day, I too will infect my child with the looming specter of Mr. Danver. When I was a kid, I lived in a haunted house. I know that sounds, and I don't want to sound pedantic, but I lived in an actual haunted house. It was never anything sinister throughout most of my childhood. You would see things out of the corner of your eye. You'd come downstairs and find things moved a little. My mom even had her hair pulled in the bathtub once, but it was an isolated incident that never happened again. Things moved downstairs, you'd hear weird noises, sometimes you'd hear voices, but it never went beyond that. It was annoying sometimes, but I never really felt threatened. It was just something that happened. Until my parents decided to sell the house. I was about 18 or 19 years old, and I'd just dropped out of college. Medical hadn't been for me, and I was just really burnt out and kind of lost. I had been writing since I was 8, but I hadn't discovered horror yet, and was still trying to hash out something in the fantasy trade. I had a job, and I had my parents' house to fall back on, at least until they informed me that they were moving 2 states away. They didn't have it all set up yet, but my parents were doing well enough that they could afford to go ahead and pick up another house to flip, while they were still trying to sell this one. They offered me a pretty sweet deal. Stay at the house and watch the dogs while they went and got the house ready to move. They'd be back in about 2 to 3 months after they had everything ready, and then they'd start moving everything up there officially. If they hadn't sold the house by then, I was more than welcome to stay and keep living in it for a while. This turned out to be moot since I didn't stay in the house longer than about a month. It started out with little things. Things were always going missing in the house. Car keys, coffee cups, and books, but now they were nowhere to be found. I lost my car keys 3 different times in that month, and each time I had to go to the dealership and get a new one made, to the tune of about $50. My school textbooks that I was getting ready to sell to a classmate also went missing, as did my Game Boy and a bill that I'd been planning on paying to keep myself out of debt. That's just the stuff I can remember, but it was a constant struggle, waking up and wondering what was going to be missing. The dogs also got very nervous in the house. My parents kept border collies, 2 of them, and they'd always been welcome in the house, along with the other menagerie of animals that my mother kept. They'd never been uncomfortable coming in and out before, but now they seemed to want to live on the back porch rather than in the house. The Florida heat is no joke, and when a dog with long hair would rather sleep in the non-air-conditioned back porch than inside, you know something's going on. I just chalked it up to them missing my parents, but I had no idea that it was about to start rattling up. That was about the time I started noticing the shadows. I slept upstairs more than downstairs, feeling safer upstairs, in case someone decided to break into the house. We had neighbors who were less than reputable, and our house had been broken into while we were on vacation before. I figured that if someone broke in, being upstairs would give me more time to get my gun ready and call the police. But the real problem was already inside the house. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night, awoken by a sound or by a feeling, and see something moving in the room. Not really moving, I guess. I'd see the shadows on the wall as they walked behind me or around the bed. I'd turn my head to confront them, but there would never be anybody there. The room was always empty, and a search of the house would prove that no one was in there. What's more, even though they were on the back porch, I knew the dogs would pitch a fit if they smelled someone in the house. They might not have liked being in there, but they didn't like anybody being in there unless they knew them. I tried sleeping on the couch, but it was the same problem. I'd hear whispery voices, see big long shadows up the wall, and when I turned over to confront them, they'd be gone. Sometimes I'd hear things moving if I slept downstairs, so I always made a habit of sleeping upstairs. Most nights I tried to have friends over, people to watch movies with, or people to keep me company while I was at home, but most every night I wound up staying there by myself. I'd stay at friends' houses sometimes, but never for very long. I had responsibilities at home, and none of their parents were ready for a long-term house guest. I should have left after the shower incident, but I managed to talk myself out of it. I really wanted to believe I had just scratched myself on something. No one wants to believe their childhood house is actually haunted by hateful spirits. I was in the shower about 3 weeks after they left. I was getting ready for work, soap in my hair, soap in my eyes, when suddenly something scratched my shoulder. I opened my eyes and immediately regretted it, but I started looking around to see if one of the cats had scratched me or if I had run up on a hook or something. Mom had little hooks on the wall for loofahs and things, but they had already been taken down. I didn't see any cats or anything in the bathroom, and I went back to cleaning the soap off myself before inspecting the scratch. It was from my shoulder blade to my mid-back, and it looked like 3 long scratches that looked a little infected. I put ointment on them and put a big Band-Aid over them. Mom was a nurse, and she had a lot of stuff like that in the craft room, and tried to ignore it. It was just an accident after all. These things happened. So I fed the dogs and went to work as I always had. When I got home that night, that's when the weirdness really hit a fever pitch. The second I came in the door, it was around midnight, I could swear I heard people upstairs. Sounded like 4 or 5 of them moving around on the 2nd story. I grabbed my dad's gun that he kept by the TV stand and headed upstairs to have a look. I hadn't seen any signs of a break-in, no broken windows or open doors, and I wondered how they'd gotten in without being seen. My parents had a big house, but most of the easiest ways to get in were through the living room. Unless these guys broke into a back room, I didn't figure they could have gotten in without me noticing. I came up the stairs, Beryl leading the way, but as I swooped into the big front room where my parents slept, there was no one there. I searched the house, upstairs and downstairs, but I found nothing. It was as if I had imagined the whole thing. The dogs sleeping peacefully on the back porch led me to believe that I was getting jumpy, and as I got ready for bed, I couldn't help but listen out to make sure that it wasn't just my nerves. That was when something kicked the door in, and I jumped about a foot. I was washing my face in the sink, and I winced as the soap came into my eyes again. I came downstairs several at a time, the gun back out front to find the front door open, and no one there. I'd expected to hear footsteps as I came down the stairs, maybe even people running, but there was no one. It was an empty house with nothing in it. I made another pass at the house, but still found nothing. I was getting jumpy, really not liking what was going on here, and it was getting hard to get ready for bed. I brought the dogs back inside, little as they wanted to come in, and I tried to coax them upstairs so I could feel like I had a little company. I had known these dogs all their life. I helped my mom raise them from puppies, and it was the first time I had heard them growl at me as they stoically refused to go upstairs. They didn't snap, but I got the feeling that if I pressed the matter much, they might. I finally left them downstairs, deciding to close my bedroom door and get some rest. I put a chair under the front door as well. No sense waking up to it slamming open again if I could help it. I managed to get to sleep after some unsuccessful tossing, but when I did, it was short-lived. In my dreams, there were people standing around me, whispering. I didn't know who they were. They were people I'd never met, and when I rolled over to look at them, they had no faces. They were made of shadows, and I got the feeling they were talking about me. I can't explain why. There's no reason I have to feel that way. But suddenly, I knew that I was the subject of their conversation. I rolled over in my dream, not wanting to look at them, and that's when I saw the shadows riding up the wall. They danced and capered across the flat eggshell paint, and I realized I wasn't sleeping anymore. I could feel eyes on my back as I shivered under the covers, and the more awake I came, the more I realized I could still hear the whispered voices. These were the things that I'd been seeing when I tried to go to sleep every night, and as I came awake, I found that the shadows were still there. They were rising up the wall, 7 or 8 feet tall, and their legs stretched out behind them grotesquely. I don't know what they were saying, but I didn't like it. It was something like muttering, a constant flow of low talk, and when I turned to look at them, they didn't disappear this time. I couldn't see them. Not really. No more than I believe they could see me. But I knew that they were looking at me. I was filled with the most profound terror I've ever experienced. I didn't know what to do. Did I stay? Did I go? This was my home. I had always felt welcome there, and this was the first time I had ever felt unease in the house. In the end, I chose not to confront them. I rolled out of bed as quick as I could and ran for the door. The dogs looked at me like I was crazy as I went downstairs, but I didn't really care. I was not staying in that house for another minute. I went to my car, opened the door, but remembered that I'd left my keys inside. I looked back at the house, but the thought of going back in there made my knees weak. There was no astral lights in the windows. There were no weird figures looking down at me. But suddenly looking at that dark house by night made me never want to go back in there again. I slept in my car till morning, and after the sun came up, I went to get my keys and a few things. I called a friend of mine and asked if I could spend the night at his place indefinitely, and after telling him what I had experienced, he agreed. I don't think he believed me, but I think he believed I'd seen something. His mom was the kind of person that believed in most anything, and when I told her, she insisted that I come stay. I stayed at his house until my parents sold the place, and then I went to live with my grandma until I got a place of my own. I thought I might be done with the weirdness in the house, but it had one last surprise for me. I went back a few weeks later to help them move some of their things onto the truck, and when we lifted the sectional, I found something I'd been looking for. Underneath the couch was everything I'd been missing, stacked in a neat pile and just waiting to be discovered. My dad laughed about it, saying I must be kind of scatterbrained, but I knew I'd checked under the couch many times. I helped them move their stuff on the truck, but insisted on being gone before dark. They thought I was being silly, but I never came back there again after dusk. When they sold the house a few months later, I got my stuff out and never came back. My mom got into ghost tours and things later in life and did some research on the place after I told her about my experience. She was almost giddy when she told me about the checkered past of the house we'd lived in. Several people had died in that house, and not all of them of natural causes. There were rumors that 2 brothers had had a duel in the backyard, and one of them was still buried on the property. A boy drowned in the pond that sits at the corner of our land. Several people died of natural causes in the house, and whether or not they're the ones who haunt the house, I don't know. I find sometimes in my life that strange things seem to follow me. They seek me out sometimes, and I think that might have been part of the reason I started writing horror. The closer I get to understanding it, the more I know I'll understand my reasons behind it. And that's not the only strange thing that's ever happened to me. Perhaps I'll tell you about a few others sometime, if you like. I was a child of the late 80s. This was a time when kids played till the street lights came on, and riding your bike through town was as normal as going to the corner store to get your mom some smokes. In fact, the woods seemed to be the only place Dad had specifically said was off limits. The woods seemed to be a boundary for many families, and I never knew anyone who went there willingly. It's one of the few things that stayed the same to this day, though so many others have certainly changed since I was a kid. One prime example was the telephone. Coming from a small town, my telephone was on a party line, so if you wanted to talk to your friend, you went to his house and you did it in person. I was pretty fortunate in that respect. My best friend Davey lived right next door. If I wanted to ask him to play G.I. Joes or ride our bikes, I could just walk 20 paces rather than digging my Huffy out of the garage. Unless, that was, we decided to use the tin can phone. The tin can phones were something we had cooked up after watching a science show on TV. The guy on the show had hooked a pair of tin cans together with twine and showed that no matter how far you went, you could still hear the person on the other end of the can. Davey and I had thought that this was just about the coolest thing we had ever seen, and we set about making some for ourselves. I found a pair of old soup cans and a long spool of Mom's twine, and attached the end to the cans. We could hear each other pretty well, a fact that surprised us to no end, but the farther away we got, the harder it became to hear each other. "Let me show you a different way," Dad said, startling us a little since we had been so involved in our little project. He had linked the cans together with some fishing line, and the connection had been the next best thing to crystal clear. We used them a lot, linking our tree houses together with the phones, and we could talk into the night on them as we camped out in different tree houses. It wasn't as clear as a telephone, but it was amazing the conversations we could have over just a simple little device. When Davy got grounded one summer, they became our only means of communication with each other. Davy, you see, had gotten himself into a little bit of trouble. He had gotten addicted to the new arcade that had just come up downtown. The laundromat that had once been there had been cleared out, but I can remember smelling detergent and fabric softener every time I went to play a game of Pac-Man or Galaga. Davy and I went there a lot, but Davy seemed to have developed an unhealthy love for the games. Any money that he could scrape together was shoved into the arcade machine, and I remember noticing that he was absent from school in the middle of the day and suspected that he had snuck off to the arcade. When the truancy officer brought him home around lunchtime one day, his parents finally decided that enough was enough. He was grounded for the summer. They told him that he might manage to earn some of his stuff back with good behavior, but forbid him to go to the arcade until he could get a handle on his addiction. Davy and I talked over the tin can when we could, but Davy made it pretty clear that his parents would take that away if they found it. We would camp out every weekend when the weather was fair, and we talked most of the night, me suddenly being Davy's only real connection to the world. So when I picked up the can one night, calling for Davy through the 100 feet of fishing line, I was surprised to hear someone else pick up right away. As it turned out, though, it wasn't who I was expecting. "Hello?" said a small voice, not like Davy's at all. It sounded like an adult trying to do a bad imitation of a kid's voice. "Who's this?" it said again, and I remember shaking off my uncertainty as I remember that Davy liked to do voices sometimes. Davy and I sometimes listened to the radio DJs prank call people, or we'd catch comedy performances on the satellite TV Davy's family had. Davy had a few characters he'd been working on, despite the fact that they all just kind of sounded like him, and I assumed that this was nothing more than another bad character performance. "Who's this?" I challenged back. "This is Sam," the voice said, still high-pitched, but getting a little surer of itself as the string made it sound tinny and robotic. "But my friends call me Tin Can Sam." Yup, definitely a new voice. If it had been modern day, I would have said that it reminded me of Herbert the Pervert from the Family Guy show. It was 1991, however, and all I could equate it to was the funny way that Michael Jackson talked. The voice was funny, kinda, but it still just sounded like Davy doing a bit. "Okay, well, Sam, why do they call you Tin Can, then?" "'Cause I wear the tin cans I empty like jewelry and clatter everywhere I go. I'm a hobo, you see, and most of my meals are taken from cans. Who do I have the pleasure of conversing with tonight?" I played along and introduced myself to Tin Can Sam. He asked me if I went to school, and I told him that we were out for the summer. He asked if I lived around here, and I told him I lived next door. He asked me how old I was, and if I knew the kid who owned the treehouse, and a dozen other things as I played along. Some of you guys will think this is weird. Why would I surrender a lot of information to Davy that he would already have, especially if he was doing a bit? Well, to answer that question, you'd have to understand how Davy was when he was doing a character. Davy was one of those people who would commit to a role. If he was doing a new character, that person didn't know you. Interacting with him was like meeting Davy all over again. But he was my friend, so I put up with it. At least it wasn't Grandma Gerda, who had a memory problem and constantly forgot the things you told her. So I played along with the game, asking Sam what it was like to be a hobo. "It's all right, I guess. I used to own a hardware store, but the people didn't like me very much, so I had to leave. It's rough not having a house sometimes, but I meet so many interesting people on the road." "What do you do for fun?" I asked, nodding to myself at how thoroughly Davy had committed to the role. "Tell stories, mostly. Sit around the fire at night and eat your dinner and tell tales. We especially like scary stories." "Scary stories?" I asked, a little taken aback. Davy was not a fan of scary stories. He liked to play it cool, but he was a bit of a scaredy cat at the core of it all. When we watched the scary movies sometimes, the volume low so his parents didn't catch us, Davy always hid his eyes and sobbed sometimes when the killer got somebody. Sam liking scary stories was not something I was prepared for. "Do you like scary stories?" Sam asked, his voice sounding hungry for the answer. "Yeah, I like scary stories. I got a real scary one if you'd like to hear it." I nodded before realizing he wouldn't be able to see me and told him that I did. I was still absolutely sure that this was Davy doing a bit, but the longer I listened, the less sure that I was becoming. The longer I listened, the more the voice sounded less like Davy and more like a stranger. "Good, 'cause it's a real scary story. It's about these kids who were camping in the woods one night. They didn't have a tree house like you, but a tent instead. They had set up far from town where they lived, and they camped at the site often. They came there for a sleepover one night, but they didn't know that there was an extra in their party this time." I sat on the fluffy orange rug I had taken after Mom was going to throw it out and felt my teeth trying to chatter. If this was a bit that Davy was doing, then it was better than usual. As the string brought his words to me, I remember feeling my spine shudder in my back. This was different. Way different, and I wasn't entirely sure that I liked it. "As I came up, they heard me. They looked out to see what was making so much noise, peeking from the zipper as they looked into the once inviting woods. It was dark, though, and the woods were dense. As I moved about, rattling and shaking, they kept looking around anxiously, trying to figure out where I was. The more I moved, the more it scared them. They thought I was a ghost or some sort of spook, and the longer I rattled, the more they shivered. It was windy that night, and I seemed to be everywhere." Oh, okay, Davy," said my voice shaking a little as I watched the fire and my lantern dance. I don't like this game anymore." "Who's Davy? I told you my name's Tin Can Sam. Now where was I?" I looked out the window, trying to see if Davy was in his treehouse, but the branches of the big oak his dad had built it in obscured the structure. All I could really see was the string as it hung taut between us. "Oh, that's right. I could hear them whispering over there, discussing their chances if they ran. They didn't think they stood a chance if they stayed, but if they ran, well, they believed I could only catch one of them. They were arguing, starting to yell, and as they got louder and louder, I crept up to their tent. I'd have had them then and there, but suddenly they burst out of the tent and ran in every direction. I smiled as they ran, knowing that I could easily catch more than one of them." "Stop it, Davy," I yelled, the story creeping me out, and when coupled with the voice he told it in, I don't want to hear any more. Despite this, I felt unable to take the can away from my ear. "I caught them, and I cut them. I sliced them, and I diced them. I cut their throats, and I sliced out their tongues. I cut their legs, and I took off their fingers, and when I turned my attention to the third boy, I knew I could get him before he got home. I took off after him, my cans rattling like ghostly chains." He kept glancing behind him, hearing my clatter as I got closer and closer. His feet slapped against the ground, and if he'd hit a single root, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I was so close, my knife still wet with his friend's blood, and as I lunged, he jumped over a small fence and came into his backyard. I stood, watching as he tripped and rolled onto the grass of his house, and when he looked back, I melted into the woods. His race won. I let the tin can fall to the rug, not wanting to hear anything else as I scrambled to the ladder to my treehouse and pulled it up. Unlike the children in the story, I was not in a tent. I knew that no one could get me if that ladder was up, and as I dragged it into the treehouse, I could see a shadow as it hunkered at the edge of the fence that separated my yard from Davy's. It was a man, a skinny wisp of a man, with strings of cans hanging off him. He looked up at me as I looked down at him, and even in the dark, I could see his broad white teeth as he grinned. I slammed the trapdoor shut, but even in my tree fort, I wasn't outside his reach. As I hunkered on the carpet, I heard his voice ooze from the can as he left one final word on the matter. "Tell your father he was right to tell you to be cautious of the woods." He may have said more, but I threw the can out the window then and heard it tonk as it landed in Davy's yard. I spent the rest of the night with my knees against my chest, jumping at every sound outside as I listened for the clank of cans. I didn't come out when the sun came up, and when someone called my name from the ground, I jumped in surprise. Looking out my window, I was happy to see that it was my dad. I came down the ladder, leaping into his arms as I cried against his shoulders. "What's the matter, kiddo? You have a bad night?" he asked, smiling but clearly concerned. I felt him stiffen when I told him what Tin Can Sam had said, and I felt him hug me even tighter. "I'm so sorry," he said. I never slept in that treehouse again, and after I told Davy about what had happened, I don't think he did either. I'm an adult now, and my parents' house is my house. After Dad died of a stroke while I was in college and Mom passed away a few years later, Melinda and I decided to move into what was the largest part of my inheritance. Our children love the big backyard, the treehouse that I've refurbished and repaired, but I always warned them to stay out of the woods. They always begged to be allowed to explore, but I've put my foot down where the woods are concerned. I've never seen Tin Can Sam again, but if I ever think that maybe I imagined it, all I have to do is listen carefully on quiet nights. Sometimes, if you listen closely, you can still hear the clank and jangle of the old cans as they blow in the breeze.